Chermaine Borg for the second half of our meeting. Before I introduce Charmaine, I want to invite everybody who can turn on the camera to turn it on. If you're not with an avocado mascara on your faces, or please show up. It's nicer to see each other faces. So Charmaine, thank you so much for accepting our invitation. Dr. Chermaine Borg is an assistant professor in the University of Groningen. I'm sure I'm not pronouncing it that it should be pronounced, but you'll tell in a little while how it should be. She has earned a master's degree for the Institute of Psychiatry, King's College of London, majoring in CBT and women mental health. Chermaine completed her doctorate studies in the experimental psychology and clinical psychopathology, and her research has been well captured by media agents. Her research focuses on sexual excitation and inhibition. She has been accredited as a psycho-sexologist, and she's currently a management committee member of the European Sexual Medicine Network and the education committee member in the European Society for Sexual Medicine. So thank you for accepting our invitation.
Thank you for the introduction. I hope it all works fine. So I need to share, I'll try to upload my lecture. I'm using a different computer today, so I hope I managed to do it correctly. Bear with me a few seconds, hopefully. It should be uploading soon. Sorry for this.
In the meanwhile, I want to say that I've heard Charmaine a few times talking about her research on disgust. And I think you're one of the main researchers in the world dealing with this complicated and very interesting topic. So again, thank you for sharing this with us.
So thank you. I hope you find it interesting, because I can imagine, I understand that most of you have medical backgrounds. Is that correct? Yeah, so I can understand that it might come across as superfluous, or yeah, maybe you have more difficulty to relate to the research that I'm going to discuss with you. So please make it interactive. If you have questions or something that I'm saying which does not make sense or it's not clear, please do ask me a question, okay? I always like it to be more interactive. And the fact I'm seeing some faces makes me so happy, because now I'm getting used to these lectures, just talking to myself with black screen, and I find it, yeah, really difficult. So this makes me very happy. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the, yeah, this kind of dynamic between sex and disgust. And this is, as it was said in the introduction, it's kind of my niche in research, and yeah, I find it quite interesting, and I will explain why that is. So first I thought I'll put a picture from where I come from Malta, because I've been working here for very long, but I originally come from Malta, and that's the first picture with a lot of buildings and churches and beautiful, colorful boats. And this is where I live now. This is where the University of Groningen is. And when I put these pictures together, I thought there's definitely a lot of similarities here. I think I am attracted by boats and blue, though here, unfortunately, the sky is rarely blue, I must admit. But for this picture, it was a pretty nice capture. And I thought I'd first say something about what is disgust? Why disgust? From all these emotions like shame, guilt, that you might more quickly associate with sex, why do we discuss about disgust instead? So I will say something about the features of disgust and the disgust-based mechanisms underlying certain sexual dysfunctions. And then I selected 4 empirical studies, which I worked on using different methodologies. I thought in this way I can more easily showcase the work that we do. I selected a study using FMRI, an experimental manipulation with behavioral studies, 1 study using implicit measures, and a study using psychophysiological methodologies. So the idea is that actually all sexual stimuli are disgusting to start with. And if is that true, why do people have sex? That's kind of the starting point of my research question. And then I will tell something about how the findings of these studies can tell us something about clinical implications, like what is the implication? That's what we care about at the very end of our research, how this can fuel our clinical interventions. We know from anecdotal evidence, and I have some research now confirming this as well, that children in pre-puberty, so just before they go into full puberty, they have this disgust expression when they see, for example, their parents kissing. Or if they receive a sloppy kiss, now I receive this from my own children, they're like, oh, yucky, sloppy kiss. They really want to wipe it off, which is a bit strange. When they are very young, children generally can play with their poop, do disgusting things that the adult find disgusting. But when it comes to sexual stimuli, the more they age, so around puberty, they have this specific disgust response towards sexual stimuli. And this should not come as a surprise, because when you think about it, all the sexual or most of the sexual stimuli, if you think, for example, for a moment about the ejaculate, the vaginal fluids, sweat, all these stimuli are disgusting. It's very weird, actually, and strange that we show the sexual appetite and we come in contact with these stimuli. Perhaps the stimuli that I selected here are not the most disgusting, they are quite sensual actually, but in general, if you can think about these stimuli, you can experience the disgust yourself. I always give this example that Freud had mentioned in one of his theories, that you can have sex and exchange all kinds of body fluids with a partner, but if you have to brush your teeth with the same toothbrush the morning after, you might hesitate. So apparently, this makes us think that sexual arousal is doing something. And it might be obvious for some. So, yeah, of course, if you're sexually aroused, you might do other things that you will not do if you are not sexually aroused. However, there's no research to tell us about this. There's a number of assumptions, a number of theories, but there's no research about it. It's very limited. And this is why I became very interested in understanding why people have this kind of general disgust response towards sexual stimuli, but at some stage we come in contact with these stimuli. And when I was doing my PhD now many years back, in 2013, when I finished, I conducted a lot of studies, a number of papers with a gynecologist, Willebrod Weimer Schultz, now he's retired, where we were finding that women with vaginismus, at the time they were not merged with dyspareunia, but we had different groups. I had a group with women with vaginismus, a group with women with dyspareunia, and a healthy control group. We were consistently finding that these women physiologically, and also using implicit measurements and other tests, and I will show you some of this data, respond with disgust over and above fear. So one would expect that they would respond with fear to penetration stimuli, the stimuli that are most crucial for them, the disorder-specific stimuli. We found consistently that they respond with disgust rather than fear or sexual arousal. And then I started thinking, then it makes sense that these women that are have sexual dysfunction respond with disgust, but I would expect that women that do not have any sexual problem, that they feel that they are sexually satisfied, they would not experience the same disgust, and they would experience sexual arousal instead. And I was surprised to find that this was not the case. And this kind of when the story became more complicated until we arrived at better, deeper understanding. But just to give you a bit of a background. So as I was saying, in pre-puberty, the children experience this disgust. And at some stage around puberty, there is the willingness to come in contact with these same disgusting stimuli. So something happens. And it could be that disgust as a compensatory mechanism, when there is more risk because of the autonomy that these people have now, these adolescents now have, that is a compensatory mechanism, disgust increases or decreases. It can be as a defensive mechanism, it increases to protect us against the contamination and possibilities in the outside world, but it can also be that disgust decreases to facilitate sexual encounters because reproduction and sexual pleasure is equally relevant. However, with a number of studies, now we start realizing that it is sexual arousal that is probably doing the trick, that is overriding this default disgust. So it's like everyone experience, or generally people experience this disgust towards some sexual stimuli or most sexual stimuli, I must say. But then, because of the increase in testosterone or androgens, that is more a motivating factor, the sexual arousal overrides this negative, disgusting response, which allows for engagement. So one hypothesis was, could it be that failure to extinguish the sex-induced disgust then leads to sexual problem? So is the disgust that we see in women with vaginismus and dyspareunia at a physiological level as well? I will show you how we measured the physiological disgust response. Could this be the disgust that for some reason was never extinguished, was never weakened? Perhaps because in the window that we have to neutralize, to weaken disgust, perhaps they had, how do you say, like hesitation to approach sexual stimuli. Perhaps they were in a culture and upbringing that sex was considered a negative, with negative connotations. It could also be that for various reasons, your sexual repertoire becomes very narrow. And then cues for sexual encounters might trigger transgression rather than like a feeling of transgression, like you're doing something wrong, rather than that kind of like that you appreciate a stimulus like a sexually arousing, a hot stimulus. You start appreciating more as a transgression. And there is some work conducted on this, or sort of that we can learn from, where they measured for example, a young person stealing from a fragile old woman. And this elicited in the observers the same physiological facial expression of disgust as rotten tomatoes would. So we can understand that the same would apply if, for example, you consider sexual pleasure for a woman negative, or that you should not do it, that the man should do it. Then if you are asked or encouraged to touch yourself for pleasure, then you might feel you're doing something wrong that you don't associate with yourself, should not be doing. You go more cognitive rather than you actually melt with the sexual experience. And we all know here that in order to feel sexual arousal, to feel sexual excitement, you need to cognitively elaborate on the stimulus. And if you're distracted by other you can't feel emotional, cognitively but so I said, why this party to start with because sexual stimuli is disgusting. And disgust did evolve as an emotion, as a disease avoidance mechanism. So I want to stop for a second. Is the internet connection good? Because I'm receiving messages that is unstable, but is it okay?
For the last 2 minutes, we didn't hear you very well, but maybe 60 seconds, not even 2 minutes, just for the last minute.
Oh, okay. I hope it does not bother us anymore.
Great. So very much looking forward to listening to you, Gerard. So whenever you're ready, I'll
Okay,
stop.
and now somebody's not muted. Let's take a look who that. I think we are good now.
But was that a question, or I thought maybe that was a question? No? Okay. Yeah, so disgust, we were interested in disgust for the same reason that I told you before, that it developed to protect us from what to eat, really, to deal with these adaptive problems of what to eat. If we eat toxic things, then we cannot survive anymore. And if we touch contaminating objects, the same. And with whom to have sex. So what to touch, what to eat, and to whom we have sex. If we have sex with a sibling, for example, you're not widening the genetic pool, so it can create some problems. And disgust is a basic emotion like fear is and shame, and it has also a very specific facial expression, as you can see on this slide, with the eyebrows pulled down, narrowed eyes, the nose wrinkled, the nostrils narrowed, and the upper lips pulled up, lips loose or mouth closed. So kind of that's a very good example. And when we want to measure the unique physiological marker of disgust, we measure the levator muscle, the facial levator muscle here. It's when we wrinkle our nose. Of course, we use this with the EMG, so people cannot really fake it because it's a very solid objective measurement for the physiological expression of disgust. And we also measure the levator, the corrugator muscle, which is this muscle here, and that's a more generic measure of negative emotions. So what we do to have the specific disgust response, the facial disgust response, generally we subtract the activation of the levator from the corrugator muscle. And sorry, there is a typo there. When we are disgusted, we also interpret ambiguous cues more negatively as well. For example, if you are, I'm going to be very, how do you say, direct here. I hope no one will be offended. But if you are giving a blowjob to a person and you in your mind are becoming very cognitive about it, like maybe the smell, maybe the texture, that can really elicit cognitive biases that you can't concentrate. Of course, you won't be able to feel sexual arousal. People might feel like they are going to throw up. The retching, it's more likely to experience symptoms like this because also ambiguous cues then are interpreted negatively. And what people do if they experience disgust, of course, you avoid the experience. You either distract yourself by some sort of level. You try to distract yourself by, for example, we hear in the clinic that they might do tissues around the penis or a condom to try to find an adaptive way how to distract, to create distance, to create avoidance from the actual experience. But you can also do it by just withdrawing attention. So you do it by literally withdrawing attention, which as well, this safety behavior will not allow the individual to let the sexual arousal roll. And disgust increases the function of proximity. So now I'm just giving you the characteristics of disgust that you can apply in a sexual encounter, right? So we say disgust increase a function of proximity. The closer you are, the disgust response, the more intense is felt. Say if you have to look at this picture, I find this picture quite kind of, how do you say, impactful. Because if you see these pictures, this picture, you feel disgust, of course. And I can see the facial expressions immediately. It shows that there is disgust. But if I had to tell you, focus on that particular tomato, which is one of the most rotten tomatoes, encircled in this green circle, grip it with your 2 fingers and bring it closer to your mouth. So you're touching it, and then take a bite from this tomato. Of course, the feeling of inclusion, of touching and then of inclusion, it's really intense. It becomes way more intense than by just looking at a picture. So we know that when a person perceives a stimulus as disgusting or fearful, it applies as well, the emotion is more intensified, or is intensified as a function of proximity. Now, we know that sexual activity is indeed a risk for contamination. And there is a study conducted by a large company here called TNO. It's a Dutch study, but published on PLOS ONE, that actually found that by just, I forgot now if it's 10 seconds or 5 seconds, but 5 or 10 seconds of a mouth-to-mouth kiss is offering the space of an exchange of 80 billion bacteria. Of course, not all bacteria is wrong, and some bacteria and mouth flora, etc., is normal and it's healthy actually. But this is the pathogen exchange that occurs in just a mouth-to-mouth kiss. So imagine what happens with more deeper sexual encounters. Now I'm putting you off sex, all of you here today. I hope I will make it better for you. Okay. Yeah, I have to skip this model, and that's just because in the translation from my PowerPoint to Mac, it did not come correctly. Not all the arrows are correctly. So all arrows are black now, but that's not the scope. So I will send the model after the presentation. I think that's better. So you have the correct one, and you can also find it on the papers from ResearchGate or other methods. Okay, so are sexual stimuli disgusting to start with? So we had these ideas that sexual stimuli and sexual body products and body parts, like the tip of the penis, the aperture of the vagina, the ejaculate, the sweat, the semen, are extremely disgusting. But is this really true? And we did an FMRI study, because apparently there was, at that time, say somewhere around 2010, there was absolutely no research done with fMRI on women and sexual stimuli. There were some studies with 5 participants and 2 participants, but not really like a group methodologically correct study. And wanted to understand what stimuli that are disorder specific do to these women. I was not about arousing women. I would use very different stimuli. So I can maybe, I'm not sure if it's offensive for anyone, perhaps I can move it just not to continue looking at these penetrative stimuli. I'm sometimes too exposed to these stimuli now, and I feel everyone is fine with them, but perhaps not everyone is. So just I changed this slide, but I keep talking about the previous slide. So we wanted to understand what disorder specific stimuli, because my main group of interest were the women with vaginismus, right? The starting point of my work were the women with vaginismus. And we know that the most fearful stimuli, the most hesitated stimuli, is the penetration for these women. And they say all kinds of things. I feel that my vagina is going to rupture. I feel that if I allow kissing and intimacy, that his hands goes in. It's kind of, there's lots of jumping in their cognitions. And we really wanted to know what's happening when they are seeing the penetration stimuli. But before we go with the woman with vaginismus, we thought, let's first see assuming that women with vaginismus indeed express disgust, because we saw this with other measurements, we wanted to first know how women that are sexually asymptomatic respond to sexual stimuli, penetration specific. And yeah, we did quite a complicated study, so I'm not going in detail because I also have to check how I am in time. I'm really bad in time, so I'm not going into the detail about this study, but I'm putting the reference of every study on the slide, so you can always, if you're more interested, you can find these papers. I can also send you this paper, no problem. But I will tell you the crux about the study. What we found is that when we did a very stringent analysis in the FMRI, just to simplify, I'm not sure how comfortable you are around FMRI data, but what we did is that we used, say, a brain map of when these women were looking at disgusting bodily images, because we wanted to control for the textures of the stimuli, for the color distribution of these stimuli. So we wanted to use similar stimuli in everything apart from the penetration. And we used disgusting stimuli, subtracting all other visual recruitment. And we put it on another brain map where they were looking at the penetration. This type of analysis, you only tick the box in if the voxel is activated both in the disgust stimuli and in the penetration stimuli. And what we could see very interestingly is that for these both very different, I would say, type of emotions, the penetration and the disgusting stimuli, the primal part of the brain, the bed nucleus of the strata terminalis, for example, were highly activated. So we're activated for both of these block of stimuli, which was very interesting and very worrying for me. I was finishing my PhD then, this was around 2014, so I finished it in 2013. I was finishing my PhD and I thought something should have gone very wrong in the analysis. It can't be correct. And in the meantime, I was doing this study with Yannico Georgiatis. Maybe you remember him from his work similar to this work that I'm presenting here. We analyzed everything, and then in the process, another group published similar work, which was in a way very reassuring, because we could understand that the sexual stimuli can elicit both sexual arousal, but also negative emotions, can be quite ambiguous in how the brain responds to these stimuli. And after this paper was out, there was lots of news about it, that women respond to pornography as rotten tomatoes, and it really was taken out of my hands, so to say. But this was not the message. I believe that the women were in a scanner, bombarded with these penetration stimuli, so we kind of contaminated their environment. And we now talk constantly about responsive type of sexual arousal in women. So we did not give that time to really let them feel the stimulation. We did not prepare them. We just bombarded them with these stimuli. And I believe that if we did the study differently, but we were not after arousing women, like we first induced some sexual stimulation or erotic script, then the activation would be very different. But in this way, because we just presented them with the stimuli, which are quite hardcore stimuli, without any preparation, they responded with disgust, similarly to how they respond with disgust. So this I will skip. And how am I with time? Tell me a bit, how am I with time? I think I need to, yeah, I'm doing very bad with time. Is that correct?
We have another 15 minutes.
Oh, 15 minutes, another. So I can take, say, I don't know, like half of the time, say 7 minutes, just talking, and then I'll take the questions. Yeah?
Great.
Okay. Luckily, I prepared for 30 minutes. Otherwise, I just continue. I always talk more than I prepare for. Then we thought, okay, how can it be that women are disgusted by sexual stimuli? Can it be that it's because they were not sexually prepared? That's what we were thinking in our post hoc understanding, trying to kind of reflect of what could have explained this finding. And then we did a very quick but fun study in a way. We had 3 groups of women. So it was a between group design where we had 30 women. We gave them a general arousal movie. Then another group where we selected female-friendly erotica and just a very boring movie with going around with the train, I think in Norway, if I remember correctly. And we included general arousal to make the design more sensitive, to be sure that what we are seeing is the impact of sexual arousal and not of general arousal. Because as you can imagine, if you are, say, for example, running or playing a football match, or I don't know, or really engaged in something interesting for you, perhaps physical, and someone hits you, you will not feel the same pain or the same, the impact will be different, the experience and your tolerance will be different if you are distracted than if you are not distracted. So we first wanted to see what the general arousal captures, and then if sexual arousal does that bit more. Yeah, and we generally induce these different moods for about 5 minutes, and then we froze the screen, which was a very large screen. I will show you, I think, yeah. And then the experimenter would go with a tray with 2 tasks, and then 2 minutes movie, 2 tasks, 2 minutes movie, 2 tasks, until we did 16 tasks. And each task was well controlled by time. They had to observe the task, create the impression of the task, conduct the task, and then rate the task after completion. And this was you can see it on the top right corner, where you have this very large screen, 1.5 meter by 1.5 meter, I think. And we had on the other side, we had the experimenter with all the tasks there, and they had to go in with the task. The tasks were interesting. I think that's the word to explain it. But we had sex-related disgusting stimuli and non-sex-related disgusting stimuli. And this is because when you are having sex, you are not only potentially disgusted by the disgust stimuli, but if you are in a bedroom where there are smelly socks, of course that will have an impact on your sexual arousal. It's a very different story than having the perfume that you prefer and a clean room. So we can understand that not only sex-related stimuli have an impact, but also sex-unrelated stimuli. So we had very interesting stimuli, like, for example, a condom with coconut milk, and we gave them the task and the script that they had to read, and they had to touch it with their finger, and it was all time controlled. And for example, they had a cup with a cockroach in it. It was not real, but all looked very, very realistic. And they had to take a sip from this cup of water. So these were the type of tasks. And what we found is that the influence of sexual arousal on the perceived level of the elicited disgust, so now this is just the subjective level of disgust, how they, the self-reported disgust. Before the task, we could see that the group with the sexual arousal rated the sex-related, now disgusting stimuli, as less disgusting compared to the other 2 groups. And for the non-sex-related disgusting stimuli, it was the same pattern, but did not reach significance. And for the actual completion of tasks, so how many women did eat this biscuit with a worm lingering on it, or drink from the cup with the cockroach in it, we could see that for the sex and non-sex related stimuli, the sexual arousal was the group that actually did, which a highly significant finding with a strong effect size. We could see that the sexual arousal was really what was doing the trick. And as I said, I think given the time, I'm going to skip this. I can say it very briefly. In women with vaginismus, I did a series of studies. I only include one here with Willebrod, Weimer, Schultz, where we looked at women with vaginismus and dyspareunia, where we had a gynecologist, that was Willebrod then, that would confirm that the person has vaginismus or dyspareunia. And of course, we had some issues because that was around the time we were discussing the merging of vaginismus and dyspareunia. But we use strict measurements how to distinguish between these two groups. And then we would do a number of measurements, like we used FMRI measurements, we used subjective measurements. Consistently, we kept finding that using implicit association task, it's a psychologically highly validated measurement using the EMG, this muscle here that I'm showing there, the levator muscle, using subjective self-report. We consistently kept finding that the woman with vaginismus significantly more than the woman with dyspareunia, and from those healthy controls, they respond with more disgust, and also more than they respond with fear. So this is the line of research that I conducted in the, say, the first years after my PhD. And now I'm moving slightly to a different line of research, of course, building on my model because I'm still very interested in it. I find it very fascinating to see this dynamic between disgust and sexual arousal. But now recently I was contacted by, recently, it's already about 3 or 4 years ago, by a startup company in the Netherlands, where they were interested how I came with the idea of inducing sexual arousal to reduce disgust. And they were interested in the other side of the coin. They thought, why not inducing aversive smell then, doing the contrary, to kill sexual arousal? And of course, in the beginning I thought, who wants to do that? I mean, we generally struggle to get sexual arousal high. Who wants to kill sexual arousal? But of course, it is for women who feel, and it can be men as well, but it's generally women, it's more common that they feel under sexual threat, especially in countries like Africa, where it's kind of accepted almost that women are sexually violated. So there was this company called Envy, where they developed a bracelet with a very highly aversive smell in it, that if you break it, the idea was that it can kill the genital sexual arousal. So that was the theory, and we were the science behind it. I have nothing to do with the marketing of this bracelet, but I was the science testing it. And what we did is that we had men that we first wanted to sexually arouse them, because it's one thing to kill arousal or to disinhibit the generation of sexual arousal, to first have sexual arousal and then kill it. The second one is a lot more harder. So we first wanted to sexually arouse this man, and then we had what we call an olfactometer, which is this very complicated box at the side that with a pipe, or a tube, not a pipe, a tube that goes in the nostrils, one with the neutral smell, just to control for the air pressure that goes in the nose and the feeling of surprise, and one with the aversive smell. And we had EMG, so again, measuring the disgust measurement, measuring the aversive smell, and also the genital measurement. We use penile circumference measurement. And because as you can understand, they had a lot of measurements, these men, so they had the tubes of in the nostrils, the EMG around their faces, and the measurement around their penis. So we wanted to first make it a bit easier for them and to show them some comedy to put them more at ease. And then we showed them the pornography, where we only included them if, of course, they were they had genital sexual arousal. Only then they could participate in the study, or we use their data. And it was quite difficult. The study was by far the most complex study I ever participated in. And luckily I was blessed with extremely smart students. But we had, for example, even the simple measurement of the penis was very complex, because you cannot just, I don't know if you have an idea of how these measurements work, but they are very fragile, and you need to select the right size. So of course you can't write small, medium, and large, because no one will select the small. We had to think even at this level, how are we going to ask the participant to select the right size of this measurement? And we cannot be in contact with the participant. So it had to be a video on the computer that they see. They have to do it themselves. So it was really a hard task. And then one of my students came up with the idea to do kind of tapes with different colors. And the participants would put it around the penis, and according to the color that the tape will attach to, then they would select the envelope with the right size. So there were no sizes, and I thought this was quite a smart idea. I wish it was my idea. And yeah, and also working with smell, it was very difficult, because this was a very violent, yeah, it's easily spread. It was very light type of smell, so it dispersed very quickly. And this was the bracelet that we used. And what we found is that the men that were in the aversive smell, the ones that had the neutral smell, their sexual arousal continued developing. But the ones that had the aversive smell, it was kind of placebo stage, and then it declined. So this kind of gave us confirmation that this very strong aversive smell, which was, I have to say, diluted 1 to 100,000 to use it in the labs, because otherwise it could be considered dangerous to use in a small room. So we diluted it, but in the bracelet is the actual neat smell. So we had some confirmation for this type of work. And I like this work because in psychology, it's very hard to do anything that is applied. And this, we could feel that there was some level of direct societal impact, which I appreciated very much. And now in the pipeline, I'm working on 2 also quite interesting studies. I'm looking at the impact of sleep, the quality of sleep, the feeling of restfulness on orgasm and your sexual appetite, and vice versa. The number of orgasms you have on the impact of sleep. And I came up with the idea because I have the feeling from people that I talk to that a lot of people use masturbation just as a simple way to fall asleep. But we talk a lot about sleep hygiene. We talk about not using blue light, using nice relaxing music to sleep, but no one ever targets masturbation for easing sleep. And the other way around is also true, also from personal experience. When I was not sleeping because of the children, sexual arousal goes somewhere down the list and down the task that you don't even think about it. So sleep, I think that sleep and sex are directly linked. And it's very fascinating, I think, to look at this relationship. And we now did a 14-day diary study. And I spoke to Jim Faust. I think you all know him. And he is also looking at a study now at a lot smaller scale. So I looked at the more explorative relationship between the two. And they are going to do a study in Czech Republic where they study more physiological impact of orgasm on sleep. So that's also quite an interesting line. And then we're using emotion regulation studies where we upregulate sexual arousal and downregulate disgust. There are different interventions which we use clinically to be applied to measure whether the person can appreciate sexual stimuli more positively. if they can respond more positively to then pornography, if we can help them to upregulate their sexual arousal and downregulate disgust. And we can do this in a different way by giving them scripts, by giving them, helping them to focus on different things that we want them to focus, like contaminating the environment for them, like priming them negatively, or making the story more arousing to let their emotion roll. And from the line of studies that we have conducted, we understand that to erase or weaken the emotion of disgust is very difficult. Disgust is a very different emotion than fear, and a lot has been done on fear, but very little on disgust. Saying that now in the last 5 to 10 years, I think this picture is changing gradually, but it's still true that disgust is very, we say it's the Cinderella of research. There's very little on it. But what we know is that the emotion of fear is very clear in the boundaries of the threat. I always give the example of if you have a dog running towards you, very angry, off leash, you will feel the fear increasing. But as long as someone grabs the dog and puts him on the leash, you are feeling safe again. So the boundaries of the threat are very clear. And this is seen in exposure research. When you have fear, you expose the participants to spiders, for example, you have very high fear, and then it gradually goes down. So the unlearning of fear is like this. The unlearning of disgust is very difficult. And this is because if someone had to say, this handle of the door is contaminated with, I don't know, with coronavirus, and if I touch it, I will become infected, I can't convince that person that these particles are not there, or this virus is not there, because the threat is not visible to the naked eye. So the boundaries of disgust, of the threat of disgust, are immensely different than the boundaries of threat. And we see it over and over again that by the mere exposure, the disgust is not unlearned. We also did some conditioning work, and we find that disgust unlearning does not occur by the mere fact of exposure as it happens in fear. And what we need to provide our participants or our clients is prolonged physical contact, prolonged exposure. And the physical contact is very important to provide safety information that the consequence, the threat, did not occur. And then by repetition, the disgust starts weakening. And conceptual orientation is also helpful. It's that paper that I cite there of de Jong 2010 is where we discussed a number of interventions that can be applied for disgust-based sexual dysfunctions. And for example, we see women that might say, oh, my vagina is like a piece of folded skin that smells very bad. I don't want to see it. Some women never looked at their vagina, never saw the folds, how they are. The smells irritates them and disturbs them. And by changing the orientation of how you relate to the stimulus, by normalization, by exposure, and saying that, for example, the fluid is helpful, is functional, this cognitive switch helps women to be more appreciative perhaps of these stimuli, rather than avoidant and disgusted by these stimuli. Okay, so the idea is that apparently most of the people have extremely strong disgust response towards sexual stimuli, or most sexual stimuli. And some manage to get over this response and have a more functional, good sexual pleasure, and some get stuck in disgust. And if you are interested in any of the research that I discussed today, all the papers are on ResearchGate, so you can just find me there and download all the papers. And if I said something that you would want to know more about, perhaps research that is not my work, for example, the transgression for the stealing of the old lady, that's not my work, but I can also target you to the right papers. And I hope you found it interesting, even if our backgrounds are very different. I hope you still could enjoy it or take something from it. And if you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them.
I think I want to say we are so lucky that you accepted our invitation. It's amazing. It's endless, the amount of knowledge that you gave us, and that you're still there, and we are curious. I think that we may want to invite you every year once. No, it's very, very interesting. Very interesting, and the presentation was amazing. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much. That's very kind. That's very kind. I would love to come to Israel. So please invite me. I really want to come. I never been, and I really want to come.
We will. And in the meanwhile, I want to ask all our members to vote for the Malta song in Eurovision.
That's so funny.
That's unrelated, but yeah. We'll definitely will, Chermaine. We're so happy that you accepted our invitation. We are officially out of time, but I would like to, if it's okay with you and somebody wants to ask anything,
yes, sure.
If you have a few minutes and somebody would like to ask, please.
Yes, sure.
No questions?
I think everyone is extremely tired probably now.
Yes. Well, I think we have a lot of things to think about. It is very interesting. I think that part of like we see a lot in women in vaginismus, like have like morbidity, like they have the phobia component of the vaginismus, the disgust, some components of OCD, anxiety, like they're all sitting in the same bench in the brain, like OCD and phobia and disgust all together. And I must say from clinical practice that we see sometimes women with vaginismus with any disgust at all, and some with a lot of disgust, and they're different groups, like the ones that they may want to do a lot of other things other than penetration, and a different group that they are not willing to touch anything, they're disgusted by everything. So once in a while we see women with vaginismus that they don't have a big disgust component, but we see it quite a lot, unfortunately.
It can also be that people with vaginismus might experience disgust but not expressed as disgust, because phobia can also be the expression of disgust. Phobia is always associated with fear, but the more we delve deeper into phobic feelings, actually that can be just the expression of disgust. And I think with vaginismus, I see the control, the issue of control, very, very crucial. Also in the treatment in the Netherlands, we have the exposure treatment, and I think the most difficult part of the treatment, though, when we consider penetration, the effect sizes are extremely strong. If you only consider the penetration, it's not that they have sexual rehabilitation, but in terms of penetration, it's strong effect sizes. The part where they'll have to let go of the dildo for the treatment and the partner takes control, or the practitioner takes control, that's where the high emotion is experienced, the kind of the anxiety, the panic attacks that occur most of the time. I feel the control is a very important issue in women with vaginismus.
There's another question, and I think that would be the last
Michal,
one.
I would like to ask, thank you for this fascinating lecture. I'm an endocrinologist. Have you done some hormonal manipulation to study your theory? You mentioned testosterone, the seminal role for men and women. Or maybe you cannot do manipulation, but have you studied groups with hypogonadism or?
what we were doing, this is a very interesting question. And if we start, I think we will never stop, because it's a topic that I have very much at heart. And recently we submitted a grant proposal where we wanted to study the impact of testosterone on sexual arousal and on disgust. So we were using a natural study when people have prostate cancer and they are having, oh, sorry, something was happening with my screen. When people are diagnosed with prostate cancer and they have the hormonal treatment, actually the testosterone castration, in the first few days of the treatment, specific treatment, they have very high testosterone. The testosterone explodes practically. And then 3 to 5 days after, the testosterone is gone. So we wanted to conduct a number of tasks when testosterone is extremely high, in the normal levels, and when there is castration, to really see the impact in a natural way, kind of in a natural process, of testosterone on the emotion of disgust towards sexual stimuli. However, the grant was not granted, unfortunately. But it's really in my head. I have a number of urologists that would like to collaborate on this project, but yeah, money is lacking, like everywhere, I guess. And I had a number of ideas how we can block, or use an antidote to block testosterone throughout my career. But actually I find it the most difficult to study, also because hormones are so complex. I find, I mean, as a psychologist, I have neuroscience background, but still I find hormones very, very complicated. So perhaps we should collaborate.
We also measure testosterone in the blood. You don't know about the testosterone in the cells, so or between the cells. So
exactly.
So maybe.
Last question. Does culture play a role? Somebody's asking in the chat.
Oh, sorry, I missed the chat, actually. I feel so bad. Oh, I can't read anything, so it's fine. Okay, I can't read anything anyways. But thank you so much, Elisir, and yeah, for the nice comment. Yeah, it does play a role. However, the disgusting stimuli are across cultures. There was a person, Paul Rosen, who studied the most highly disgusting stimuli, and these were similar across cultures. Then some countries have very specific high disgust. For example, the Netherlands respond with disgust to obesity more aggressively than other countries. But in general, like body apertures, bloody wounds, deformity, feces, these are across cultures very disgusting. And the tip of the penis and the vagina are very disgusting, or high on disgust contamination when on somebody else's body, and very disgust sensitive, we say, when on our own body. So kind of they reflected at the opposite but equally strong feeling. You want to protect your body apertures and your mouth, for example, but they are high disgust potent one on the other person.
Okay, I think that unfortunately we'll finish here. Yeah,
thank you so much for the invite.
Endlessly.
I enjoyed it very much as well. So thank you for the invite. Yeah, and I hope at some point I get to visit you in person. That would be lovely.
Thank you. We will plan on that hopefully very soon. And thank you everybody for being with us tonight. Thank you for Daniela, as always. Thank you. And we'll hope to see you soon in person. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
תודה רבה. תודה רבה, לילה טוב.
לילה טוב, תודה.
לילה טוב. ביי ביי.
Right.